Hello everyone. Welcome to Lesson 6 of The Dream House by Craig Higginson. Today we'll continue with part 2 of the novel, working from page 59 to page 77. This lesson is a little longer than the previous ones. I suggest that you budget 2 hours of your time to get through the material thoroughly. Turn to page 59 to read Beauty's section. Pause the video while you complete your reading. In this section, Beauty has noticed that the visitor's car is mud-covered, but clearly he knows where and how to park, even though it's a city car. It's quite otherworldly, with its blinking alarms and air of importance. In contrast to many of the other characters, Beauty likes the darkness. As she runs through the storm, it feels like a blessing is passing through her. She recalls the stories she has heard about Becky, his wife and his child. The new houses being built on the property seem to be imitations of the original. Beauty is very familiar with the original house, and when she returns, she initially enters the house silently. Once a creaky floorboard has revealed her presence, she moves into the room, but Patricia and Looksmart seem too engrossed to have noticed her. Beauty has never liked Looksmart, but she recognizes him immediately. As we did in the previous lesson, we're going to consider some key quotes from this section. In quote 1, we should ask ourselves whether the ghosts of the past have finally broken Richard. It seems in quote 2 as though Richard has himself become a ghost. He is a shadow of the man he once was. There is something prophetic about Beauty's observation in the third quote. The reader needs to pay attention too. African wisdom goes beyond what people can logically know. There is a respect shown here, but we only realize that with hindsight. In the fourth quote, we realize that we've read this already. Higginson stitches the story together by overlapping the narratives of the different characters. In quote 5, Beauty gives us Looksmart's backstory. The tragic circumstances of his arrival on the farm echo Grace's story, which we shall get to know later. Beauty is treated as someone of little significance by the other characters. In quote 6, we see that she is keenly aware of all the layers of relationships on Dwaleni. She is almost invisible to the other characters, someone who's there to serve their needs. And of course, this makes her name, Beauty, deeply ironic. We return to Patricia on page 65. From Patricia's perspective, Looksmart has been so present in her life that when he left, her world lost its color. At the time, she felt optimistic about the country's first democratic elections. However, she's also very aware that the elections led to violence and exposed the savage nature of South African politics. She doesn't understand how or why Looksmart left. Beauty comments that Looksmart and his mother are difficult. Patricia asks about his success. He is evasive and asks about her, letting slip that he knows about the house being packed up and their move the next day. He inquires about her future and her feelings about leaving the farm. On the next slide, you will be able to follow along with Dr. Zwichers as she reads the passage to you.
Patricia, page 65 to 71. She has often wondered whether she would see him again. He was so present when he was present. And when he went, It was like all the colour had faded from the world. She barely noticed the phenomena at first. She was too upset with him. And anyway, she had decided she could do without him. But then, the lack slowly dawned on her. A greyness entering into everything. It was not so much that the colour had gone as much as the thing that shone inside colour itself. She suspected his mother knew why Look Smart had left and where he had gone. But to her inquiries, she simply muttered, shrugged and drifted off towards her next task. A few years later, still smarting from Look Smart's ingratitude, she told John Ford that the young man's behaviour didn't bode well for the rest of the country. What she meant by this exactly was unclear, even to her. By then the country had just had its first democratic elections, and the general mood was optimistic. But Patricia hadn't forgotten the unofficial war that had assailed their province in the years preceding it, where children were slaughtered in their sleep and whole villages burned to the ground. As the years went by, Patricia learned to shelve the disappearance of Look Smart. Along with all those other items she had never properly understood. It was a crowded shelf, even then, and the matter of Look Smart often felt like the least of it. When his mother vanished around the turn of the millennium, Patricia was so busy trying to save the farm from ruin that she barely thought about it. As Beauty told her at the time, "Oh, that family was always difficult from start to finish." He is pacing about, jumpy with nerves, like one about to step on a stage or make a speech. She still wants to ask him where he lives, what work he's doing, what brought him here. And she wants to know what it is that permits him to be so rude. He seems to find himself impressive for behaving like this and for calling her Madam with such contempt. She, who is used to seeing only small people these days, like Beauty and Richard and even John Ford, finds him almost too large to countenance. Yet he still seems such a boy. At any moment she's expecting him to show her his homework. "Oh, so how did you come to be such a success?" "This isn't fancy dress, madam. And I didn't dress like this to please you." "Why, I know that." He's still looking around the house with that strange hunger. It's impossible to know what he's thinking or what he might be looking for. All she can see is her familiar rubbish. All the boxes splayed open, undignified and exposed, a life disemboweled. The wooden Dunlop tennis racket she had as a girl, its leather handle still shining with the memory of her hot young hands. She took her to a tennis camp once in Howick. A boy there led her behind a shed and made her take his sex, scarlet root, so unabashed, into her mouth. Then there's the German saddle her father gave her for her 16th birthday. The pommel now cracked, and the grey stuffing bursting out, and the collection of Everyman classics she'd once been given by John Ford, never read, with brown leather binding that was so obviously plastic when you pressed your thumbnail hard into it. Oh, you've caught us at quite a moment. If you'd come here tomorrow, I'm afraid you'd have found us gone. You've sold the farm and are leaving tomorrow. I know all about that. Oh, you do? It's my business these days to know about such things. He turns to look at her. Then he steps towards her, again like a performer for the stage, a hypnotist, well, certainly a charlatan of sorts. There's a secret network that runs underground. When it pleases me, I put my ear to it. Oh, how mysterious that sounds. It's no mystery. She wonders whether she should be afraid of him. Well, there is certainly something dangerous about him. More the boy in him than the man. But in order to be afraid, one must have a thing of value that is under threat. Oh, and what is of value after all? There is little difference, it seems to her, between herself and that tennis racket. Yesterday's blood. That is what is running through her body. The phrase came to her a few days previously, or at least the thought did. To spill such blood would be to spill the blood of something already finished, or finished in all the ways that mattered. The only thing she has to look forward to these days is the house in Durban, which she sometimes suspects will vanish like a rainbow as soon as she reaches out to touch it. But if fear is still far off, what she experiences in its place is a vacant sadness that she and the boy with a fishing rod should have come to this. Tell me your plans, he says, in a way that almost suggests he has been reading each of her thoughts. Oh, me? I'm going back to where I grew up, to my old house by the sea. Your father is dead. Oh, for about 50 years now. Her father was dead when Luke Smart was born. But she doesn't mention this. Instead, she tells him that the house has been in her family for several generations, since her great-grandfather arrived in Durban. The city was said to be a little more than a harbour back then, and Luke Smart's ancestors were still living in the Valley of 1,000 Hills. He doesn't appear to mind her talking. He seems to enjoy the sound of her voice. Or perhaps there's a thing between her words that he can hear that she is unaware of. It unsettles her, the way he's listening and not listening. But then he surprises her again with his next question, which suggests he has been listening to her very closely after all. Won't you be sad to leave this place? Backward glances only crick the neck. He looks at her oddly, almost smiling, as he might at an exhibit in a museum. Sometimes a crick in the neck is exactly what the doctor orders. Oh, no. No, not at my age. He looks surprised by this statement. Perhaps her age has never been an issue for him, or she has no age for him at all. But what will you do? As little as possible. I plan to spend whole days simply looking at the sea. The ships will be there, exactly as she recalls them, queuing across the horizon, honking as they come into the harbour. The thick, wet, salty air and the smell of rotten fruit. Everything shimmered in Durban with the sound of insects. There were birds in every tree, a flare of crimson wings as the lories flicked from branch to branch, and the emerald sunbirds as numerous as bees. She inherited a love of birds from her father. He taught her to identify every bird's egg and every call. Well, she even tried to teach Richard the different birds in the early years. But he got no further than the yellow-billed duck. Have you ever heard the fruit bats? In Durban? No, madam. I can't say that I have. They ping. Ping? Oh, they're as big as turtle doves. Someone once told me they're the only bats the human ear can actually hear. They only come out at night, flapping around the stoep. It was her father who told her about the fruit bats. As the creatures passed back and forth through the veranda's light on their tattered wings, how she has since longed for them. That pulse in the trees, as if the whole hill is breathing. I remember that place, as if I left it only yesterday. The thought of the house in Durban always used to make her blood sing, and she hopes the house will make it sing again. Or she may even be able to take up where she left off the day Richard arrived and repair something, restore a vital ingredient before she went away for good. Oh, you'll think me foolish, look smart. But when you grow older, childhood things can seem magical. Oh, come, madam. In my head, I can't separate you from this farm. Oh, yeah, over the years, I might have settled here, grown into it. These days, I'm so overgrown with creepers and moss, with old man's beard, that I probably look a part of it. But no. Originally, I didn't actually come from these parts. He looks at her and shrugs. Whether she calls this place her home or not is clearly of no importance to him, or is perhaps hardly the point. What about the big boss, Richard? Won't he miss this place? Oh, Richard? Well, he isn't well. Not well. Hey. Look Smart looks delighted for a moment. What is it? A heart attack? No, he's losing his mind. I mean, quite literally losing it. And it's too late to find it. Far too late to find it. Dad always had this tone about Richard, which was designed to suggest they shared some joke about him. Yet it was a joke they never quite got around to sharing. Richard generally being a subject better laid to rest. Well, it doesn't sound very jolly. No, getting old rarely is. But you've sold the farm, you must be rich. We've been buried in debt for about as long as I can even think. You know, for every rand the Welsh ponies brought in, Richard's cows and chickens cost another 2. And Llewellyn died. You remember Llewellyn? He shrugs. Perhaps in order to suggest that in his world a horse is of no real consequence. But she suspects he recalls Llewellyn well. In fact, there was once a picture of him in this very room, near the mantelpiece. When it fell down and the glass cracked and dropped out, they never got around to fixing it. She found the picture behind a sofa during the cleaning up. The image was covered with a fine green fuzz of mold, and she binned it in a rubbish bag quickly, before she could dwell on it. Llewellyn was our very first stallion. All the foals came from him. Look Smart nods, unconsciously looking across at where the picture once hung. Although she might have planted his look there by looking there herself. Maybe Look Smart really has no memory of the horse at all. Oh, when Llewellyn went, my interest in the stud seemed to fade. We sold the rest of the ponies off to a young man from White River. A man who looked very much like yourself. But Richard and I, we can't complain. That's more than can be said for most of us. She lets out an involuntary and exasperated sigh. Well, you don't look as if you'd done too badly for yourself. I don't. Oh, and everyone has something or other they can choose to complain about. Like what? He says. Again, all ironic. Like getting old, like being rich. She turns away, wishing he would leave, understanding that, for a while at least, he won't. Oh, I don't know what you're doing here, she says. You have a whole future ahead of you. Why concern yourself with me and Richard? We are nothing in the world. We are practically antique. What are you saying? That the past is unimportant. He sounds offended. And she recalls then how easily offended he often was. When he was hurt, he always wanted to draw a line between himself and others. And after he felt a bit better, he acted all surprised when there was no one around to take up his cause. Unimportant, she says. Well, I have no idea, but the past doesn't amount to much in the end, does it? She has been driving down the same dirt road for a long time now. There is sand in her hair, and she needs a good wash. Some time back, many years it must have been, she turned a corner. Turned it as she would have any other corner. But at that moment, everything she thought about herself got lost. It would have been a fairly commonplace corner, as she didn't even notice the event. But ever since then, she has come to think of herself as some other woman in some other woman's car. He is staring at her with incomprehension, disbelief. And she wonders, not for the first time, whether she has been speaking her thoughts out loud. It was probably a thing that came from spending so many of her waking hours with Richard. Sorry, did I say something inappropriate? There's no need to apologize, madam. Apologize, but I don't think I did.
The first quote from Patricia's section is quite breathtaking. Why should look smart be grateful? This is, of course, a portrayal of white arrogance. In quote 2, there is an ironic turn. Look smart does show Patricia his homework, the plans for the new housing development on Dwaleni. The third quote takes the reader back to the world of theatre and stage. Look smart has been a performer, an actor in a play written for him. He's a stranger in his own life, and he seems to blame Patricia for this. He doesn't fit in with his mother's people, and he certainly doesn't fit in with Patricia and her world. Quotes 4 and 5 create tension for the reader. We are uncertain of Look Smart's motives, his reason for returning to Dwaleni. Do you think Look Smart is dangerous? Why? Patricia still thinks of Look Smart as the boy. You have to determine whether this is the usual racist juvenilization of black people, or whether she feels some sort of maternal bond with Look Smart. We've heard Patricia say quote 6 before. Backward glances only crick the neck. Who is she trying to convince? Herself? Quote 7 might be the crux of Look Smart's problem. He can't separate Patricia from his own alienation, which he feels started at Dwaleni, with her. Look Smart blames Patricia for having money, even though it helped to educate him. He could, in quote 8, be alluding to the unfairness of apartheid. She benefited, so it's her fault too, no matter how much she tried to redress the wrongs by educating him. In quote 9, Look Smart is offended. He needs something from Patricia so that he can let go of the past. Is it an apology? Is it something more than that? Look Smart and Patricia are at cross purposes in quote 10. He does want an apology, and she does not want to offer one. She apologizes for saying something irrelevant, but she is clear that what he wants an apology for, she will not give him. We return to Richard's point of view on page 72. Pause the video as you read this short section. Still muddled, Richard thinks that he recognizes a woman stepping out of heaven and calling to him. He flees, fearful, and knows that he could hurt himself. The earth is wet and slippery. There is barbed wire in a tangled pile. He feels that there's too much to try and remember. The farm seems in disarray. He can't find the animals. He has things to do, beyond blaming Patricia for the degradation of all he once held dear. Richard has been reduced to a child. In quote 1, we can see that there is no dignity in getting old. This is a recurring theme in the novel, one which might be more brutally relevant to your teachers as they contemplate the speed of passing years. You know that dogs are an important symbol in the novel. They trust implicitly and are rewarded with a grave. In quote 2, we see that Richard is becoming more and more like a dog, wetting himself uncontrollably in times of stress and trying to dig up the bones of his dead child. He is himself in a kind of grave, a wasteland of his own, in his broken mind. From page 74, you are to read Beauty's point of view. She notices that Becky is in one of the half-built new houses on the farm. In front of him, the workers have built a large bonfire, sacrificing even sacred yellowwood branches to keep warm. It seems as if Patricia, or the idea of Patricia, the white landowner, is part of some ritual. Becky is not really with the labourers, and yet he is standing with them. He's also not really with Patricia or with Richard, and yet he works for and with them. He's also not with Beauty, although she wishes things were different. She approaches him for help in finding Richard. Becky senses an urgency in her words, especially when she tells him that Look Smart is at the house. It is clear in quote 1 that Becky is a noble and private man. There's a quiet strength about him. In quote 2, we see again the irony in Beauty's name. It's also clear that we are building up to some sort of confrontation. Quote 3 cleverly reflects this. Once again, I would like you to use your study guide to complement this presentation. You should read page 70 to page 76, and then answer the questions from page 77. As always, I have duplicated the questions for your convenience. Question 1 most certainly refers to the secrets of Dwaleni, secrets involving Richard and the stable girls. Question 2 is a reminder of the dramatic theatrical structure of the novel, with Look Smart playing a carefully rehearsed role. In question 3, you should consider Patricia's advanced age and whether her life has any meaning left for her. This thought is continued into question 4, where you should consider Patricia's detachment from events around her. Richard's state of confusion adds to the ironic observation he makes in question 5. Question 6 gives you a chance to develop your character notes on Becky. The study guide authors entitled this section of the novel The Colours and the Dark. What do you think they meant with this title? Your answer to question 1 must refer to Richard's rather public affairs with the female stable hands that came from England to work at Dwaleni. You should also consider why Patricia chose to ignore these affairs. Beauty describes Looksmart as a character in a television series. Could it be that Looksmart is not as confident as he would have Patricia believe? That he has had to rehearse what he wants to say so often that it comes across as wooden and scripted? Patricia is not afraid of Looksmart. Why not? Well, she's got nothing left to lose. Her farm is gone. Richard, to all intents and purposes, is gone. And most of her life is gone. She really has nothing left to lose. There is a tremendous sense of loss in Patricia's statement, that she feels as though she's living someone else's life. It certainly can't be the life that she dreamed of as a young woman. There's a poignancy here of wasted opportunities, of lost dreams. Richard was a terrible farmer. Dwaleni was not one of his achievements. His sense that he's returning to his farm, which has fallen apart during his absence, reflects his increasing dementia. He's been absent in mind, not body. The farm has indeed been demolished, but not through neglect. It is being deliberately, irrevocably destroyed to make way for a housing development. Becky has been called by some literary critics an undeveloped, static character. We see here, however, that he is a quietly stoic man who deals with his life's hardships in the best way that he can. He is not unfeeling, as we do see that there is clear affection for beauty. It is important that you go through the text yourself, annotating and writing your own notes. By putting pen to paper, you'll learn to express your thoughts, thus finding your own voice with which to express opinions about the issues in this novel. Thank you for spending this time with me. I trust that you are finding these online lessons helpful. So until the next lesson, goodbye everyone.